Things Fall Apart. Chapter 4. Looking at a king's mouth, said an old man, one would think he never sucked his mother's breast. He was talking about Okonkwo, who was risen so suddenly from great poverty and misfortune to be one of the first of the clan. The old man bore no ill will towards Okonkwo. Indeed, he respected him for his industry and success, but he was struck, as most people were, by Okonkwo's brusqueness in dealing with less successful men. Only a week ago, a man had contradicted him at a kindred meeting, which they held to discuss the next ancestral feast. Without looking at the man, Okonkwo had said, "This meeting is for men." The man who had contradicted him had no titles. That was why he had called him a woman. Okonkwo knew how to kill a man's spirit. Everybody at the kindred meeting took sides with Osugo when Okonkwo called him a woman. The oldest man present said sternly that those whose palm kernels were cracked for them by benevolent spirit should not forget to be humble. Okonkwo said he was sorry for what he had said, and the meeting continued. But it was really not true that Okonkwo's palm kernels had been cracked for him by a benevolent spirit. He had cracked them himself. Anyone who knew his grim struggle against poverty and misfortune could not say that he had been lucky. If ever a man deserved his success, that man was Okonkwo. At an early age, he had achieved fame as the greatest wrestler in all the lands. That was not luck. At the most, one could say that his chi or personal guard was good, but the Igbo people have a proverb that when a man says yes, his chi says yes also. Okonkwo said yes strongly, so his chi agreed. And not only his chi, but his clan too, because it judged a man by the work of his hands. That was why Okonkwo had been chosen by the 9 villagers to carry a message of war to their enemies unless they agreed to give up a young man and a virgin to atone for the murder of Udu's wife. And such was the deep fear that the enemies had for Umofia that they treated Okonkwo like a king and brought him a virgin who was given to Udu as wife, and the lad Ekemefuna. The elders of the clan had decided that Ekemefuna should be in Okonkwo's care for a while, but no one thought it would be as long as 3 years. They seemed to forget all about him as soon as they had taken the decision. At first, Ekemefuna was very much afraid. Once or twice, he tried to run away, but he did not know where to begin. He thought of his mother and his 3-year-old sister and wept bitterly. Nwoyo's mother was very kind to him and treated him as one of her own children, but all he said was, "When shall I go home?" When Okonkwo heard that he would not eat any food, he came to the hut with a big stick in his hand and stood over him while he swallowed the yams trembling. A few moments later, he went behind the hut and began to vomit painfully. Nwoyo's mother went to him and placed a hand on his chest and on his back. He was ill for 3 market weeks, and when he recovered, he seemed to have overcome his great fear and sadness. He was by nature a very lively boy, and he gradually became popular in Okonkwo's household, especially with the children. Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, who was 2 years younger, became quite inseparable from him because he seemed to know everything. He could fashion outfits from bamboo stems and even from the elephant grass. He knew the names of all the birds and could set clever traps for the little bush rodents, and he knew which tree would make the strongest bows. Even Okonkwo himself became very fond of the boy inwardly, of course. Okonkwo never showed any emotion openly, unless it be the emotion of anger. To show affection was a sign of weakness. The only thing worth demonstrating was strength, and therefore treated Ekemefuna as he treated everybody else, with a heavy hand. But there was no doubt that he liked the boy. Sometimes, when he went to a big village meeting or communal ancestral feast, he allowed Ekemefuna to accompany him like a son, carrying his tool and his goatskin bag. and indeed, Ekemefuna called him father. Ekemefuna came to Umuofia at the end of the carefree season, between harvest and planting. In fact, he recovered from his illness only a few days before the week of peace began. And that was also the year Okonkwo broke the peace and was punished, as was the custom, by Ezieni, the priest of the earth goddess. Okonkwo was provoked to justifiable anger by his youngest wife, who went to place her hair at a friend's house and did not return early enough to cook the afternoon meal. Okonkwo did not know at first that she was not at home. After waiting in vain for her dish, he went to her hut to see what she was doing. There was nobody in the hut, and the fireplace was cold. "Where is Ojungo?" he asked his second wife, who came out of her hut to draw water from a gigantic pot in the shade of a small tree in the middle of the compound. "She has gone to plait her hair." Okonkwo bit his lips as anger welled up within him. "Where are her children? Did she take them?" he asked with an unusual coolness and restraint. "They are here," answered his first wife, Uwoyi's mother. Okonkwo bent down and looked into her heart. Ijongo's children were eating with the children of his first wife. "Did she ask you to feed them before she went?" "Yes," lied Uwoyi's mother, trying to minimize Ujongo's thoughtlessness. Okonkwo knew she was not speaking the truth. He walked back to his obi to await Ujongo's return, and when she returned, he beat her very heavily. In his anger, he had forgotten that it was the week of peace. His first two wives ran out in great alarm, pleading with him that it was a sacred week. But Okonkwo was not a man to stop beating somebody halfway through, not even the fear of the goddess. Okonkwo's neighbors heard his wife crying and sent their voices over the compound walls to ask what the matter was. Some of them came over to see for themselves. It was unheard to beat somebody during the sacred week. Before it was dusk, Ezieni, who was a priest of the earth goddess, Ani, called on Okonkwo in his obi. Okonkwo brought out kola nuts and placed it before the priest. "Take away your kola nuts. I shall not eat in the house of a man who has no respect for our gods and ancestors." Okonkwo tried to explain what his wife had done, but Ezieni seemed to pay no attention. He held a short staff in his hand, which he brought down on the floor to emphasize his point. "Listen to me," he said when Okonkwo had spoken. "You are not a stranger in Umuofia. You know as well as I do that our forefathers ordained that before we plant any crop in the year, we shall observe a week in which a man does not say a harsh word to his neighbor. We live in peace with our fellows to honor our great goddess of the year, without whose blessing our crops will not grow. You have committed a great evil." He brought down his staff heavily on the floor. "Your wife was at fault, but even if you came into your obi and found her lover on top of her, you would still have committed a great evil to beat her." His staff came down again. "The evil you have done can ruin the whole clan. The goddess, whom you have insulted, may refuse to give us her increase, and we shall all perish." His tone now changed from anger to command. "You will bring to the shrine of Ani tomorrow 1 she-goat, 1 hen, a length of cloth, and 100 cowries." He rose and left the hut. Okonkwo did as the priest said. He also took with him a pot of palm wine. Inwardly, he was repentant, but he was not a man to go about telling his neighbors that he was in error, and so people said he had no respect for the gods of the clan. His enemies said his good fortune had gone to his head. They called him the little bird Nza, who so far forgot himself after a heavy meal that he had challenged his chi. No work was done during the week of peace. People called on their neighbors and drank palm wine. This year, they talk of nothing else but the Unso Ani, which Okonkwo had committed. It was the first time in many years that a man had broken the sacred peace. Even the eldest men could only remember one or two other occasions somewhere in the dim past. Ogbuefi Izwedu, who was the oldest man in the village, was telling two other men who came to visit him that the punishment for breaking the peace of Ani had become very mild in their clan. It has not always been so, he said. My father told me that he had been told that in the past, a man who broke the peace was dragged on the ground through the village until he died. But after a while, this custom was stopped because it spoiled the peace which it was meant to preserve. Somebody told me yesterday, said one of the young men, that in some clans it was an abomination for a man to die during the week of peace. It is indeed true, said Ogbuefi Izwendu. They have that custom in Obodo Ani. If a man dies at this time, he is not buried but cast into the evil forest. It is a bad custom which these people observe because they lack understanding. They throw away large numbers of men and women without burial. And what is the result? Their clan is full of evil spirits, of this unburied dead, hungry to do harm to the living. After the week of peace, every man and his family began to clear the bush to make new farms. The cut bush was left to dry, and fire was set to it. As the smoke rose into the sky, kites appeared from different directions and hovered over the burning fields in silent valediction. The rainy season was approaching when they would go away until the dry season returned. Okonkwo spent the next few days preparing his seed yams. He looked at each yam carefully to see whether it was good for sowing. Sometimes he decided that a yam was too big to be sown as one seed, and he split it deftly along its length with a sharp knife. His eldest son Mweyo and Ekemefuna helped him by fetching the yams in long baskets from the barn and in counting the prepared seeds in groups of hundreds. Sometimes Okonkwo gave them a few yams each to prepare, but he always found faults in their efforts, and he said so with much threatening. Do you think you are cutting up yams for cooking? He asked Mweyo. If you split another yam of this size, I shall break your jaw. You think you are still a child? I began to own a farm at your age. And you, he said to Ekemefuna, do you not grow yams where you come from? Inwardly, Okonkwo knew that the boys were still too young to understand fully the difficult art of preparing seed yams. But he thought that one could not begin too early. Yams stood for manliness, and he who could feed his family on yams from one harvest to another was a very great man indeed. Okonkwo wanted his son to be a great farmer and a great man. He would stamp out the disquieting signs of laziness which he thought he already saw in him. I will not have a son who cannot hold up his head in the gathering of the clan. I will sooner strangle him with my own hands. And if you start staring at me like that, he swore, Amadura will break your head for you. Some days later, when the land had been moistened by 2 or 3 heavy rains, Okonkwo and his family went to the farm with a basket of yam seeds, his hoes and machetes, and the planting began. They made single molds of earth in straight lines all over the field and sowed the yams in them. Yam, the king of crops, was a very exacting king. For 3 or 4 moons, it demanded hard work and constant attention from cockcrow till the chicken went back to roost. The young tendrils were protected from earth heat with rings of sisal leaves. As the rains became heavier, the women planted maize, melon, and beans between the yam molds. The yams were then staked, first with little stakes, and later with tall and big tree branches. The women weeded the farm 3 times at definite periods in the life of the yams, neither early nor late. And now the rains had really come, so heavy and persistent that even the village rainmaker no longer claimed to be able to intervene. He could not stop the rain now, just as he would not attempt to start it in the heart of the dry season without serious danger to his own health. The personal dynamism required to counter the forces of these extremes of weather would be too far great for the human frame, and so nature was not interfered with in the middle of the rainy season. Sometimes it poured down in such thick sheets of water that the earth and sky seemed merged in one grey wetness, and it was then uncertain whether the low rumbling of Amadiora's tender came from above or below. At such times, in each of the countless thatched huts of Umofia, children sat around their mother's cooking fire, telling stories, or with their fathers in his obi, warming themselves with a log fire, roasting or eating maize. It was a brief resting period between exacting the arduous planting season and the equally exacting but light-hearted months of harvest. Ekemefuna had begun to feel like a member of Okunku's family. He still thought about his mother and his 3-year-old sister, and he had moments of sadness and depression. But he and Nwoyo had become so deeply attached to each other that such moments became less frequent and less poignant. Ekemefuna had an endless stock of folk tales. Even those which Nwoyo knew already were told with a new freshness and a local flavor of a different clan. Nwoyo remembered this period very vividly till the end of his life. He even remembered how he had laughed when Ekemefuna told him that the proper name for a corn cob with only a few scattered grains was Eze Agade Nwanyi, or the teeth of an old woman. Nwanyi's mind had gone immediately to Nwanyike, who lived near the Udala tree. She had about 3 teeth and was always smoking her pipe. Gradually, the rain became lighter and less frequent, and earth and sky once again became separate. The rain fell in thin slanting showers through sunshine and quiet breeze. Children no longer stayed indoors, but ran about singing, "The rain is falling, the rain is falling, the sun is shining, alone, and that she is cooking and eating." Owayo always wondered who Ndachi was and why he should live all by himself, cooking and eating. In the end, he decided that Ndachi must live in that land of Ekemefuna's favorite story, where the ant holes is caught in splendor and the suns dance forever.